There, this is Nicola Peace from Peace of Mind Properties Limited. We're an ethical management company based in Brighton, East Sussex, and we specialise in property lettings management and property renovations. Now, I'm here today to discuss whether landlords really need a letting agent. Now, if you self-manage your properties or are thinking of self-managing your properties, then do stay tuned, because near the end I'll give you some tips and guidance on how you can make sure you do stay ahead of legislation and don't open yourself up to problems. If you decide that you do want a lettings agent, again, stay tuned and I'll give you a little bit of advice on how to pick the right lettings agent, again, to make sure you don't come into problems. So a little bit about me. I've been a landlord for over 20 years. I actually bought my first property at 19. And when I decided to move away from the area at 21, rather than selling that property, I chose to let it out. And that's where my property journey began. Now, when I was 26, I decided to start growing a bit of a portfolio. But at this time, I was working full time as a police officer. So I didn't really feel I had the time to manage these properties myself, and therefore I employed a lettings agent. All went well for a couple of years until I hit a problem tenant. Now, this is when you will find out if your letting agent is actually worth the money that you are paying them. This particular tenant did pay their rent on time, but was making the flat fall into disrepair. I challenged the lettings agent about this and I wasn't impressed with the response. I was simply told this is what happens to rented properties, to which I responded, not to mine, it doesn't. At this point, I made the decision to break the contract with that lettings management and actually manage my properties myself. And again, everything went well for 10 years. I felt I was doing a good job. I was building up great rapport with my tenants. And that personal touch did mean that they tended to treat me the way I treated them, which was with respect. Now, what I didn't realise until I became professional was that I had actually opened myself up to problems. And what I mean by that is I'd done everything that I felt was required of me in terms of legislation. So prescribed information, for example. I'd made sure my EPCs were done every 10 years. I made sure that the tenants had a gas safety certificate every year. I made sure they got given a how to rent guide when they moved into the tenancy. And all my ASTs were watertight. So I felt that I had done everything correctly. It wasn't until I decided to come into property management as a profession that I realised that actually I had left myself open. There has been many a court case where judges have refused to allow landlords to use Section 21 evictions if the landlord cannot prove that they gave all the prescribed information to the tenant at the beginning of the tenancy before the tenancy began. So although I'd given the tenants all the prescribed information, I never once had made them sign for it, which is something we now do as best practice. There are over 400 pieces of legislation, rules and regulations around letting your property. The question is, do you know them all? For breaches and non-compliance, the fines can actually be quite large. There have been fines of around £30,000 and you may have to pay your tenants their rent back. If you get a problem, you find out, are you really able to self-manage? So if you needed, for example, to evict a tenant, would you really know the process to follow, or would you need some guidance with this? Now, the truth is, there are two sides to every argument. And one side of the argument is how good are lettings agents? The truth is, in this country, it's actually not regulated. And I can understand why some people get frustrated with their lettings management companies. Now, the truth is, some of the larger companies, they're not particularly passionate about your property the way you are. They may have hundreds of other properties that they are dedicating their time to. So will they really give your property the care that it deserves? I can see why people get frustrated with the lettings management companies. If you wanted to self-manage though, do you have the time? You know, the truth is that problem telephone call, that maintenance call, it's never going to come when you have downtime. It'll come when you're at a family gathering or maybe when you're on holiday. And also, How much do you value your time? Is this really what you want to be spending your time doing, or is it giving you sleepless nights? The confidence. Do you have the confidence to deal with any situation that arises should you get a problem tenant? And more importantly, do you have the knowledge to back that up? And this is why I'm saying that lettings management could be beneficial. But most importantly, enjoyment. Do you enjoy managing your properties? A lot of people do. If you don't, then life really is too short to spend time doing something you don't enjoy. Now, if you do decide to get a lettings agent, as I said before, there has been many a frustration. So how do you choose wisely in a situation where lettings managers are unregulated? The truth is, if your lettings manager makes a mistake, you are actually still liable for any penalties. So, a little bit of advice on how to pick your lettings agent. The most important thing is make sure they are qualified. So there are a number of organisations, one being NALS, the National Approved Letting Agency Scheme. There is RICS, which is the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, or there is ARLA, the Association of Registered Letting Agents. Now, if you go with a letting agent that's one of these or a member of a few of these organisations, what you can rest assured is that they keep their members up to date with the legislation and best practice. Now, other things to make sure is that your letting agent is a member of a property ombudsman or a redress scheme. These are the people that you will go to if they do something wrong or if there's a problem, and they will act as adjudicators. Have they got client money protection? They should have clients' accounts. So if they are collecting rent on your behalf and then paying it onto yourself, that money needs to be going into a client account and it needs to have client money protection. So ask to see their certificate. There's no reason why your letting agency shouldn't be transparent about these things. Terms and conditions. Are they easy to read and do you understand them? Now, a lot of larger letting agents actually tie their landlords into quite long contracts. Now, I'm actually opposed to these because the truth is, if you are providing a good service, why do you need to tie your landlord into long contracts? Our personal contracts are quite short and they go onto a rolling contract for the basis that we believe we do provide a good service and therefore our landlords will stay with us. Clarity on fees. This is an important one. I've had people come over to me saying, well, I was told I was paying 10% plus VAT or 12% plus VAT, and then all of a sudden I had to pay for inventories, for the AST to be drawn up, for photographs to be taken. Make sure you fully understand the fees being charged and you don't get any nasty surprises. Likability. At the end of the day, one of the first things I was taught as a police officer, if it doesn't feel right, it's not right. So trust your instincts. Do you like this person? Do you like the person that you're working with? The truth is, if you don't, then the tenant might not. And actually, it's all about relationships. The personal relationship that you create, either be it with your landlord or with your tenant, is what is going to make everything a smooth transaction. Do they carry out regular property checks? Now, if it's a single let property, it's at minimum every 6 months, and they should be providing you with a full report on any issues that they've seen or recommendations that they've made, and if possible, photographs. Now, we carry out regular property checks and we actually sell it to the tenants that we're carrying out a maintenance check. So it's not an inconvenience to the tenant because what we're trying to do is make sure they are living in a safe and habitable environment. So it's a benefit for them and it's a benefit for the landlord because we can make sure that the tenants are looking after their property. Now, the next question is, do you go for one of the larger companies or an independent company? Now, the issue with the benefits of a larger company is that they have a number of members of staff, and if a member of staff falls ill, you can guarantee there'll be a member of staff at a nearby town that can jump in and that can resolve any issues. But the downside of that is, for example, you sign up with a lettings manager, they pass the likability test, they're passionate about your property, and then 2 months later, they actually leave the company and another member of staff comes in because large companies have high staff turnover. The new member of staff comes in, doesn't know your property very well, doesn't know your tenants and doesn't know you. And then that's when you may start to come into problems. Whereas an independent letting agent, they also have issues that you need to make sure of. You need to make sure that the independent letting agent has all of the criteria I was expressing before, so that they all are registered, because remember, it's not a regulated industry. So you need to make sure that an independent letting agent has all of the credibility that they require. But what do they do when they're on holiday? What do they do when they're poorly? If it's a smaller company, what backup plans do they have? So, for example, ours is an independent letting agent, so we only actually have 2 lettings managers within the company. So what do we do if those 2 people are poorly? We actually have an independent self-employed lettings manager that works for one of the bigger organisations, who will come in and help us out, because it makes her a little bit of extra money and it benefits us as well. So we have a fallback plan. Make sure your independent letting agency does the same. So finally, after all that I have said, you decide to self-manage. So how can you do it right? So these are some of my best tips. The first one is make sure you become a member of either the RLA or the NLA. Now, that is the Residential Landlords Association or the National Landlords Association. They're actually soon to join forces, and they are going to become the NRLA. Now, supporting these organisations is good for many reasons. One, they have educational resources, they have a legal team that you can speak to at any time, and also they do campaign on landlords' behalf. So they do lobby governments, so it is worth spending a little bit of money with them. Now, check if you need a licence. So most areas, if you run, for example, well, all areas of the country, if you run a house of multiple occupancy, you will need a licence. But don't think that it's just those 5 rooms and above. Some mini-mos, what we call them a mini-mo, a lot of areas you still need a licence for those as well. And single lets. Now, they're a part of the country. For example, we have properties up in the Wirral, and there are areas of the Wirral where they have selective licensing schemes, and these are all over the country. So even if you're running a single let, make sure if you need a license that you have one. Now, once you've got your licenses, you're ready to let your property, what happens when you then start advertising? Okay, so once you pick a tenant, ensure that you get an application form from all tenants that are going to live in that property. Now, the application form shall include, at the minimum, their previous 3 years of residency, their date of birth, their employment details, their national insurance number. This is something that a lot of landlords forget. The national insurance number is critical if at a later date you need to do an attachment of earnings should they not pay their rent or should they damage your property. And if you can, always go for a guarantor. The truth is that tenants, they may be tempted to let you down, tempted to not pay you the rent on time. But if they know that one of their family members has to stump up the money on their behalf, all of a sudden they don't want to let you down. So it's a little buffer for your property. Now, once you've decided on which tenant to go for, you must carry out the appropriate reference checks. The first one being a credit check. There's lots of credit check online agencies that you can pay. In fact, the RLA, NLA, they will do these for you and you can pay them a fee. Make sure you get an employer's reference. Make sure that everything they've told you on the application form is true. Previous landlord checks. Now, we don't just go to their current landlord, we go to the landlord prior to that wherever possible. The reason being is, unfortunately, not everybody always tells the truth. There are some landlords that if they have a problem tenant and they want rid of them, they will give a positive reference. Whereas if you go to the landlord prior to that, they have no reason to tell you an untruth. Now, make sure you check their pay slips and you check their bank statements. So we always ask for a minimum of 3 months bank statements. The truth is, people have said to me, well, will they give you all that information? Absolutely. If they want to rent our property, they give us that information, or they don't rent the property. It's that simple. Now, checking the bank statements, the only things we are checking for is to see the rent going out on time like they have said they have done. But also, you will see if someone's starting to get into a bit of financial trouble. It may be that they have paid their rent on time before, but you can see they're getting more and more into an overdraft. And actually, can they afford the slight increase of your property? Now, also, finally, consider an online search. The truth is, you will be surprised what you can find in the public domain. People are very open about who they are nowadays, and that also can benefit. Before you carry out all of these checks, make sure you take a holding deposit. So you will all know, hopefully by now, about the tenancy fee ban, but you can take a 1-week holding deposit. Now what that means is, if that tenant has lied on their application form, and when you do your referencing, you can prove that they haven't told the truth, you're actually entitled to keep that holding deposit if you decide not to let the property to them. Now, if they have told the truth and for whatever reason you decide not to let the property to them, you must fully refund that holding deposit. If everything goes well and you decide to rent the property to them, then you can then take the further 4 weeks. So remember, holding deposits on property now is a maximum of 5 weeks deposit. Now, if you do go for a guarantor, make sure that you serve a copy of the AST on that guarantor so that you can prove they knew what they were guaranteeing. Now, 5-week security deposit. I've also had a few questions about this. Do we offer zero deposit schemes? I personally am not a huge fan of the zero deposit schemes, but I do believe in offering tenants options. Now, the reason I'm not a huge fan of them is I have heard them being missold. And we all know what happened with PPI. Now, not everyone missold PPI, but they had to pay out on everything. What have I heard being told? I've actually had someone selling a zero deposit scheme come to an NLA meeting and tell me it's cheaper for the tenant. It's not. So you need to make sure the tenant fully understands what they are signing up for. The reason it's not cheaper for the tenant is because they may pay me 5 weeks deposit, but that's fully refundable. If they pay the zero deposit scheme 1 week's deposit, which is not refundable, that's the charge, therefore it is not cheaper. It helps their cash flow, but it is not cheaper. And if they damage my property or don't pay the rent, the zero deposit scheme will pay me up to 6 weeks to cover the loss of deposit. However, they will then chase the tenants for that money. So it's not like they're no longer liable for that deposit. So it's very important, if you go down a zero deposit scheme, please make sure in writing that you have made it clear to the tenant what they are signing up for, so that should they say they were missold the product, you can prove you had no part in that. So once you have your deposit from your tenant, do make sure that you put it in one of the tenancy deposit schemes. Again, this is something you have to do. This is legislation. And you have to let the tenant know which deposit protection scheme you have gone for, and you have to let them know within 30 days of receiving that deposit. Also, before allowing your tenants to move in, do remember to do your right to rent checks. This is another condition at the moment within the UK. Now, insurance. Make sure you have your landlord's insurance that has liability should your tenant become injured within your property. You have your building insurance. Consider rent guarantee insurance. I'll be honest, it's something we actually put on all our products because it also comes with legal cover. So should we have to evict a tenant, they actually pay for the legal challenge. Another thing, if you decide to self-manage, maybe consider some sort of home serve, home emergency cover, breakdown cover. At least then, if you do get that call on a Saturday evening, when you are at a family gathering saying, oh my goodness, my pipes have burst, you can ring home emergency and get someone round within the 24 hours. Obviously, after telling your tenants to turn off the water supply. Now, the main thing is, do not hand over any keys until all of this has been done. Make sure your deposit is in your bank, your first month's rent or your first week's rent is in the bank, and make sure all of your checks, you're happy all your checks have been returned before you hand over those keys. And make sure your mortgage are aware that you are letting the property. So you've either got a buy-to-let mortgage, or if you've got a residential mortgage, you have permission to let. So tenants moving in, the next thing to do is to complete the inventory. Now, an inventory is very, very important should you want to take any deductions from that deposit. Should you want to make deductions from the deposit, it will go to arbitration. One of the deposit protection schemes will make the final decision, and an inventory is what you will need. We actually do a threefold inventory. So we do a written inventory that they must return to us within 7 days. We also do photographs, and we do a video inventory. So when we actually go to the property on the day of check-in, we go round the property with the tenant. We actually get them to say their name. We say the date, so it's dated and time-stamped, and there is no argument then about the condition the property was in when it was handed over to them. It's very hard to argue with video evidence. Now make sure, like I was saying before, that you give your tenants all that prescribed information. So a copy of the EPC, a copy of the gas certificate, a how to rent guide, and also electricity certificate if you have one. Now, if you're renting out a HMO, you must have an electrical test done every 5 years. It's not currently legislation for single lets, although I do imagine it will come in very soon. Now, but the truth is, you do have to, if there is an issue in the flat, if there's an electrical fire, you do have to prove that the electrics have been well maintained. Now, my question is, if you're not carrying out electrical safety checks, how can you prove that the electrics are well maintained? So again, best practice, if you want to give yourself that peace of mind, is to have an electric test done every 5 years. Test the smoke alarms. Now, you can just press the button, but we again believe that best practice is to take a smoke canister and we actually let off some smoke under the smoke alarm. We do it in the tenant's presence so they can see that the smoke alarms are working and have been properly tested. And we actually get them to sign that that has been done in their presence on the same document that they sign for their prescribed information. Check your carbon monoxide detectors. And also make sure that there's a carbon monoxide detector in every room where there's a solid fuel source. Smoke alarms in a single let just needs to be one on every floor. Now, conducting your Legionnaire risk assessment, this is something that a lot of landlords do actually miss out. Now, the legislation on this says that it needs to be done by a competent person. So that has left itself open to subjective view. Now, a competent person, you could consider yourself competent. Now, why do you consider yourself competent? I'll tell you one way that you can help yourself is, again, being a member of the RLA or the NLA. There is a guide on how to conduct your Legionnaire's risk assessment, and there's actually a risk assessment on there that you can download and you can do. If you don't feel confident, if you don't feel that you could portray that you are competent in a court of law, then again, you can employ a company to do that on your behalf. Privacy notice. Everything's GDPR now, so you need to make sure that your tenants know that the information that you are holding about them is being held in a secure manner and will be used in a secure manner and not sold on to other people. So make sure you give them a privacy notice. And the most important thing is just regularly refresh your knowledge. 25% of people are going to be living in the private rented sector. That means that voters in the private rented sector are increasing. That means they will have influence over government. What that means is legislation over the next decade is going to get tougher and tougher. So it will keep changing. Do keep yourself abreast. And the best way to do this is to become a member of the NRLA. So thank you for listening. That's everything really I have to say today. But what we will do is in the comments section below, I will attach a link which will take you to a page where you can download a PDF of all those tips that I have given you should you choose to self-manage. Now, also, if you need to contact us, if you have any questions, it doesn't matter where you are in the country, we always wish to help. So we do manage and let properties within the East Sussex, Sussex and Surrey areas, but outside of that, we will still give people advice. So feel free to contact us. Our email address is contact@peaceofmindproperties.co.uk. That's contact@peaceofmindproperties.co.uk. Or feel free to give us a call at any time, 01273 569 100. That's 01273 569 100. And if we can be of any help, we certainly will. The most important thing for us is that as landlords, we all provide happy, healthy, safe homes for our tenants. Thank you for listening.